A couple of weeks ago on Cartoon Conspiracy, we found ourselves diving into Rick and Morty's The Ricklantis mix-up to dissect the bubbling tension within the Citadel of Ricks as well as the oppressive environment therein. And today, we're bringing you what is pretty much part 2 of this theory. And while we are going to revisit some discussion about the Citadel, our main focus today, of course, is our boy, Evil Morty. By the way, this is a Rick and Morty episode, so if you still somehow aren't caught up on Rick and Morty, there are going to be some pretty major Season 3 spoilers in this video. But yes, since we last took a look at the perpetual mystery that is Evil Morty, not only has he returned, but he's also become the new democratically elected leader of the Citadel of Ricks, which is a interesting path for Evil Morty to take. I think we can safely say none of us were expecting this moment, especially since it was kind of just shoved into the middle of the season as opposed to leaving it at the end for some sort of epic, mind-blown cliffhanger thing. But while that reveal was pretty shocking, it's kind of hard to know what to think about it, since we know so little about Evil Morty, much less his MO or his end goal. So today, that's what we're gonna try to figure out. I'm Jacob with channel Frederator, and let's examine the enigma that is the inner machinations of Evil Morty's mind to figure out what exactly is his plan for the Citadel of Ricks. Let's first take a look at Evil Morty within the context of the show as a whole, as well as within the context of the Ricklantis mix-up. And from there, we'll dig a little deeper into his plans. One of the overall themes of Season 3, driven home by the season finale, seems to be what Rick has been saying since the very beginning, which is that A, nothing matters, and B, the answer to whatever question you have is don't think about it. With Season 3 stretching to re-establish the status quo that Seasons 1 and 2 seem to be edging away from. While it doesn't completely discount some of the unanswered questions of the show, it's quick to remind us that once Rick explained his philosophy to Beth, the fact that Beth used her choice to embrace what she already has is just as valid as Rick's disdain and apathy towards the same situation. Any satisfaction we may take from our lives or the choices that we make is directly dependent on how we choose to perceive them, which honestly could also say a lot about how Rick and Morty is received by the public as a whole. But of course, that's not gonna fly with us today. While this show definitely plays fast and loose with the idea of continuity, the show absolutely maintains little vertical slices of story that we're constantly reminded of. Things like Tammy's role, Phoenix Person, who is currently MIA, the Cronenberg C-137 universe, and of course, the Citadel of Ricks. So as we take a look at the Ricklantis mix-up, let's examine Evil Morty through a few different lenses. First, how did he gain his popularity? Second, what were his immediate actions upon gaining power? And third, could knowing Evil Morty's ideology allow us to better understand his actions? And before we get started, it's worth noting that Evil Morty's actions may or may not be tied to his true identity. And while we did come to the conclusion that Evil Morty could be the Rick that we follow throughout the show's original Morty, this has never been confirmed, so we're going to sidestep this for now. For all intents and purposes today, Evil Morty is just a Rickless Morty with an unknown agenda. So how was Evil Morty able to use the Citadel's politically fragile state to his own advantage? Well, what does that even mean? In what way could the Citadel be considered politically fragile? Firstly, it seems like Evil Morty's most fundamental step in his playbook is to cater to those who are marginalized by the rest of society. Mortys are often seen as second-class citizens and have a pretty strong bias against them in the Citadel, as evidenced by one of the Citadel's primary news sources openly mocking the Morty Party at the beginning of the episode. The newscasters vastly underestimate the Morty Party's potential, going so far as to insinuate that Evil Morty looks adorable simply playing politics as opposed to posing an actual threat. Another factor of Evil Morty's strategy can be seen on the whiteboard behind the initial conversation between Evil Morty and his campaign manager. We see a whiteboard that cites divided Citadel as an aspect of the Morty advantage. So it seems like a big part of Evil Morty's strategy is to also cater to those Ricks who feel marginalized by other Ricks who are placed higher in the social hierarchy for seemingly arbitrary, frivolous reasons. Evil Morty also appears to be the only candidate who brings up the issue of the Citadel facing a systemic problem from the top down rather than the other way around, as most Ricks seem content to see the issue. While the majority of Ricks see their society crumbling because of vagrant homeless Mortys and disgruntled Ricks, Evil Morty brings to light that these are all symptomatic of the real problem, which is those at the top who are content with the current system that, whether it means to or not, only strengthens the divide between the disenfranchised and the entitled. And Evil Morty takes it upon himself to be that voice for the voiceless. He tells the metaphorical 1% that their days are numbered, and the revolution is coming for them. Democratically, he means. for now. And like we mentioned a few weeks ago, there's also the factor that the Citadel is an absolutely soul-crushing environment. On top of all the systemic problems already mentioned, this is a world where the feeling of toppling the oppressive machine is itself branded, packaged, and sold as a commodity. This is a world where the mystique of a Morty throwing himself into a wishing portal in the fleeting hope of things improving is immediately ripped away with the reveal that the portal is just a garbage dump. Even if Slick Morty's wish did kind of come true, the reality check we're given seemingly robs his message of its meaning. This kind of environment would also play to those who felt abandoned by the system, and they would probably become more willing to do something to impart actual change. Do something to actually disrupt the system as opposed to buying that feeling through simple ricks. Do something like vote for a fringe political candidate. As we all know, in the world of politics, talk is cheap. Words are just words, and speeches are for campaigning. And once Evil Morty wins the election, now is the time for action. I just spilled water everywhere. But even before his odd anti-monologue, we do see some changes take effect as a direct result of Evil Morty winning the election, so what happens? Well, firstly, the new Citadel's codes apparently absolve Cop Rick of everything he did, from being caught up in the warring gangs of Mortytown to killing his own partner. His own partner, a Morty who believed himself to be freer than most other Mortys by leaning into the oppressive nature of the Citadel. But in the end, his own brash outlook of Mortys being the underlying problem of the Citadel eventually caused his downfall. Same old story. Rick's killing Mortys. Evil Morty also immediately abandons the curriculum of the unnamed Morty reform school that we see throughout the episode. And while a rework of the classes is hinted at, all we know right now is that it doesn't seem like these Mortys are going to be assigned any new Ricks anytime soon. And of course, the last thing we see Evil Morty do in this episode is immediately execute all of his dissenters in the Citadel's shadow government as a show of force, which is an interesting detail. In a lot of democratic societies, there are those, actual real conspiracy theorists that suggest that either the country or the world or the universe is actually governed by some sort of ominous shadow government, which would of course mean that whoever was elected into office doesn't have any actual real power. In the Ricklantis mix-up, this is shown to be 100% entirely the case, even when the Citadel of Ricks was purportedly run by the Council of Ricks. But with Evil Morty's actions at the end of the episode, he is left as the singular, unequivocal ruler of the Citadel. So based on these actions, coupled with his rise to power, can we pin down Evil Morty with any sort of ideology? It's actually a little bit more difficult to do than it seems at first glance, since the actual political platforms of each party in the episode aren't very well defined, especially within the Ricks. But in any case, let's see what we can uncover. First off, the rigid class system within the Citadel pretty much uses Mortys as shorthand for the idea of systemic discrimination present in many societies. There's even a short scene where the Mortys are throwing a pride parade to hammer this home. Evil Morty plays not only to these oppressed Mortys, but also to the downtrodden Ricks, acting as a voice for the common folk who will unite to displace the bourgeois Ricks from their ivory towers. Now, this sort of populist political movement wherein politicians mess with the current social order in the supposed interest of the common people is nothing new. This sort of strategy has been in play for pretty much as long as democratic elections have been. All the way from the disruptiveness of Roman tribune Publius Claudius Pulcher in the 1st century BCE, all the way to how populism's marriage with identity politics created symbols on all sides of the political spectrum in last year's presidential election. But that's not where it ends with Evil Morty. While his campaign claims to be for the people, this all seems to dissolve when you actually look at it closely. As we've seen before, while he does choose to be the voice for all of these abandoned Mortys, he's not exactly above exploiting them himself. And I'm not talking about political exploitation. In Close Rick Counters, he literally tortures hundreds, thousands of Mortys in order to cloak himself from the Citadel, as well as the Rick that we follow throughout the show. So it seems fair to say that Evil Morty doesn't exactly help out his own kind through any sort of empathy. Everything and everyone exists solely to progress his unknown Machiavellian agenda. Evil Morty seems intent right now more than anything else to be the sole, undisputed leader of the Citadel. And that actually segues us pretty neatly into the dreaded topic of fascism. Fascism, in its colloquial definition, generally involves practices like silencing dissenters and autocratic dictatorships. Of course, there are way more defining characteristics, but these are just a few of them. Fascism is a big umbrella term that encompasses a lot of stuff that we frankly don't have time for today. But even based on those two things that we looked at, Evil Morty seems to be well on his way to establishing some sort of authoritarian dictatorship. Based on his first immediate acts when taking the office of president that didn't seem to be subject for for any approval, as well as his murder of the shadow government? Yeah, that seems to be where we're going with this. Not only that, but going back to the whiteboard during Evil Morty's campaign, we can see a note that lists alternative news sources as another aspect of the Morty advantage, with alternative noticeably in quotation marks. Now, to be fair, there are a few different ways we can interpret that. I mean, we could give Evil Morty the benefit of the doubt and say that he's planning some sort of huge, brand new, unbiased news network. But within dictatorships, the silencing or restriction of certain news media outlets in favor of those that are more acceptable sources is a well-known practice. This strategy, again, has been used throughout history, but it's still used in parts of the world today within certain states that value propaganda above all else. So could Evil Morty's plan for alternative news sources include shutting down the Rick-centric news present in the Citadel in favor of anti-Rick propaganda? But with all of this talk of Evil Morty's ideology and fascism, there is one rather large issue. Fascist leaders typically gain power through a rise in rampant nationalism, something that the Citadel should be uniquely free of. What other powers would the Citadel feel the need to feel superior to? There don't seem to be any wavering tensions between the Citadel or any countries or planets or universes or any governing bodies at all. Heck, the whole point of the Citadel is to hide Ricks from all other governing bodies. The Citadel, for the moment, doesn't even seem all that concerned with the Rick that we follow throughout the show, even though the last time they crossed paths with him, he took the whole place down. So without a common enemy for the entirety of the Citadel to unite against, what's Evil Morty's plan now? So here's the million-dollar question. Why the Citadel? What does Evil Morty have to gain by running the Citadel of Ricks? He seemed to be doing just fine on his own. Well, many theories still hold steadfast that this is all a plan to get back at the Rick that we follow throughout the show, which would make sense if he is indeed our Rick's original Morty. And yes, at first glance, this idea may seem a tad overly simplistic. But Dan Harmon and Justin Roiland seem to revel in subversion, so this idea is totally still on the table. That said, it still does have its share of small problems. While it's true that Evil Morty might have a better chance at locating our Rick with the Citadel's resources backing him up, Evil Morty has already been face to face with our Rick. From there, it would seem relatively easy for him to find a way to track our Rick, right? It's a leap in logic, but Evil Morty has more than proven his capability to create a tracking device of that caliber. Furthermore, when Evil Morty actually had our Rick in his clutches, he didn't seem that intent on killing him, despite whatever Evil Rick was actually saying. Knowing how Rick thinks, if he really wanted our Rick dead, he would have spared the theatrics and just done it. So assuming that Evil Morty's goal isn't to exact revenge on our Rick, what are we left with? Well, a common theory about Evil Morty is that the influx of Rickless Mortys in Mortytown and the Morty School is a direct result of the events in close Rick counters of the Rick kind, which would mean that the political unrest that we see in the Citadel would have been a long, calculated con by Evil Morty, stacking the deck in his favor by increasing the Morty population right under the nose of the entire Citadel before the political race even began. Now, ignoring the issue that Evil Morty would have had to have started this long before the Citadel ever became a democracy, why would he feel the need to increase his political power through these displaced Mortys? Based on what we've seen, upending the previous power dynamic was a pretty high priority of Evil Morty. Could Evil Morty's intention simply be to elevate the status of Mortys within the eyes of all Ricks and Mortys? Abandoning the notion that Mortys are forever bound to be the sidekicks of Ricks, a common theme found in the Ricklantis mix-up? Finally realizing Mortys as their own individuals? Maybe we've been looking at this all wrong. After all, evil is a subjective term. Looking at things from an unbiased perspective, Evil Morty doesn't seem that much worse than the Rick that we follow throughout the show, in that they're both horrible people. I'm not saying that Evil Morty is a saint or anything. But keep in mind, the reason we call him evil is not necessarily because he's evil, it's just because he's an antagonist to our Rick. Besides, Evil Morty's actions might actually be a little less extreme than our Rick. Yes, he may have murdered Ricks and exploited Mortys to climb the political ladder in a reprehensible display of the ends justifying the means, but so far he still seems at least somewhat intent on pushing some sort of social reform with his newfound political power. And then we have our Rick, who murdered just about everyone in the Citadel before outright destroying the whole thing, as well as the entire economy of the Galactic Federation as means to, above all else, separate Beth from Jerry. Not to mention, it was also all in pursuit of that damned Szechuan sauce. When comparing the two, it seems like Evil Morty has a much more structured plan for social reform within the Citadel compared to Rick's general apathy towards literally everything. Evil Morty just happened to go about all of this in one of the most objectively evil ways imaginable. You could probably even make the argument that Evil Morty could be an extension of the dilemma Beth faced in the ABCs of Beth. When faced with how to utilize the opportunities you're given, is it better to make any choice, as Evil Morty does, or no choice, as our Rick seems committed to? Of course, there are issues with this idea, like campaign manager Morty insisting that Evil Morty is up to something much more sinister, as well as the reason for absolving Cop Rick of his crimes. I mean, we could speculate that Evil Morty is planning on running the Citadel in a sort of Caesarist fashion, ruling with an iron fist, promoting a violent social order, and pardoning Cop Rick for purging the streets of Mortys who only encourage their negative stereotype. It's all possible, but with the vast amount of unanswered questions, this is all just a projection of what could be. Good God, the Ricklantis mix-up is so dense. Every single image has so many things going on. But with everything we've taken a look at today, there are so many unanswered questions about Evil Morty and his plans with regards to the marginalized population of the Citadel, as well as the Rick that we follow throughout the show. And since we didn't really enter this episode with a hypothesis in mind, we can't really assign this conspiracy a rating, so this week, I'm gonna leave it up to you. How many envelopes filled with secrets out of 5 do you rate our conclusion that Evil Morty might actually just be looking for equality for Mortys? Do you think that Evil Morty's plans could be something different? Does the name Morty even mean anything anymore? I've said Morty hundreds of times this week. It's just a collection of sounds now. Morty. And where do you fall on that whole the actual season 3 finale hasn't aired yet theory? Once you've let us know your thoughts in the comments, be sure to like this video and subscribe to channel Frederator for all sorts of awesome stuff coming up in the future. And don't forget to click that little bell icon next to the subscribe button to become part of our notification squad so you'll know exactly whenever we've got a new video for you. Because remember, Frederator loves you.